Now, I am thrilled to kick off today's event, Breaking Barriers and Busting Biases, Empowering Women in the Workplace, sponsored by Lumen. Lumen is a global company of over 40,000 professionals dedicated to empowering businesses to produce amazing things. Today, I am so excited to be joined by three amazing Lumen leaders, Beth, Shauna, and Annette, to hear how they've navigated challenges in their careers and their advice on how we can all actively bust gender biases at work and in our communities. Now, I was able to briefly sit down with these lovely ladies last week, and just in our short period of time, the breadth of the experience, the passion, the viewpoint of these ladies, I mean, the topics that were discussed, women in high places dealing with fear of having to start over in their careers after having children, women at the menopause age, leaving the workforce. I mean, I believe that these conversations make us better. And I believe that we are absolutely, with this panel, we are in for a treat today. Ladies, can you introduce yourself and tell us about your background and what you do in your role today at Lumen? Beth, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Alexis. So I'm Beth Ard, and I lead customer experience at Lumen. I have a team that spans the data analytics space, the journey management space, and then a communications team. And so it's a pleasure for me to join you today, Alexis. And I'm looking forward to our conversation.
And hi, I'm Shauna Gilliland. I have responsibility here at Lumen for our solutions architecture and engineering organization. I've been with Lumen for into 18 years now, so it's been a while, and had a great opportunity to have a breadth of experiences here, work with some amazing people, some amazing women, and I'm super excited about the conversation today as well. Thanks.
Hi there, Annette Murphy. I'm president of two of Lumen's regions outside of the US. I'm president of the EMEA region, and I'm actually based in London. And I'm also president of the Asia Pacific region. So the workforce that I have, that I lead is obviously a very diverse one for more reasons than just the topic that we're discussing today. And the perspective I bring is not only, I guess, my perspective, because I've been in this industry for over 25 years and a lot has changed in that time frame, but also the issues we see in one part of the world are, different to the issues in another. So looking forward to the conversation today, and thank you to Fairygodboss for hosting the event.
Absolutely, thank you, ladies. This month, we celebrated International Women's Day and Women's History Month. The theme of this year's International Women's Day was Break the Bias. 73% of women experience bias at work, yet less than a third of employees are able to recognize bias when they see it. Whether deliberate or unconscious, bias makes it harder for women to get hired and promoted, and negatively impacts their day-to-day work experience. This hurts women and makes it difficult for companies to level the playing field. Knowing that bias exists isn't enough. We all need to take action to break the bias on International Women's Day and beyond. In order to break the bias, we need to acknowledge it first. What does break the bias mean to you? We'll start with Annette.
Thank you, Alexis, and I think it's a very interesting question. So, the overall objective is obviously to get to a gender equal world, and that will mean different things to different people. But I guess, in terms of the movement and what it means for me, and I think what everyone can do to perhaps take a step forward from the position that they're in today, I think if we can get to a point where we increase our individual accountability levels, on every aspect of what we do, and we ask questions, we become more intuitive, if you will, naturally over time, through the dialogue being a far more open and perhaps even challenging one in a very safe way going forward. That for me would signify real progress. But, you know, people have to take a very deliberate action from my perspective, you know, towards increasing that levels of accountability. And, you know, that starts with leadership in organizations, creating that environment to be able to, so people can move forward. But also there's a very individual responsibility as well, I think, on people to increase those levels of accountability.
Shauna?
Yeah, I mean, similar to what Annette was saying, when I think about break the bias, it really, I take it very personally, and that it starts with me and being aware of my own biases. You know, any type of change we want to drive has to start with ourselves. And I truly believe that. And continue my own education about where biases exist. But then it's also in my role as a leader, it's about calling it out when I see it, making sure that the people that may have done something that appears to be biased, that they're aware of it. I think a lot's going on from a conversation standpoint, which is fantastic. There's training out there that's happening, and there's, you know, if you look at what we're doing here at Lumen, we've rolled out training specific to this so we can identify it, but it still happens. Everyone's still on a learning curve, and I think it's important that we just continue to call it out and set expectations within our organizations about what is and isn't acceptable.
And I would just add to that, Shauna, that when I think about break the bias, what I love about that term is that it's aggressive. I think that over time we have used more milder terms. We're leaning in. You know, there's other milder terms that we've used to kind of address this problem in the workplace. And I like that bold statement of breaking the bias, because we do need to take action in a very, you know, a very intentional way to solve what we see as bias in the workplace. I think it's, when you think about bias in the workplace, I think what good could look like is if in these spaces we are safe, there's not stereotyping, there's not discrimination, there's not microaggressions, and instead there's a celebration of the diversity that we have in our organization. So right now I feel like you look at corporate America today, we're sort of evolving to a recognition. We have a problem. We're going to get more institutional about changing that problem. But I don't see like a true cultural change that is truly celebrating the diversity in our workforce, whether that's, you know, gender diversity, cultural diversity, et cetera. So I am excited about getting a lot more intentional and a lot more active and aggressive in something for this, because there's still a long way to go.
There's a long way to go. And I love the language that you used, Elizabeth, aggressive. You have to be aggressive with an issue that is of this magnitude. Thank you for that, ladies. So next question is, in your career, where have you seen or experienced bias?
I'd be happy to jump in. So I can give a very specific example. I had been newly promoted to a vice president. This is a handful of years ago, and we were dealing with a major customer problem. And I was personally coordinating a lot of internal resources to solve it. But what I was finding is that the customer on the other end, a man, was not very interested in hearing what I had to say. So I had to go ask my peer, who was also a man, to deliver the exact same message because I was doing all the work. And it calmed the customer down because it came from someone like him. It was very infuriating and demoralizing, but I think the great part that came out of that was the support of, you know, the people that I worked with, and B, going forward where we saw things like that, they reinforced my role with customers if we ever saw a problem. So there was a benefit to it ultimately, but at the time I was incredibly frustrating.
Of course. And then just to tag on to that before I hop over to Beth and Annette, what is the best advice you have to hold others accountable or stop bias in its tracks?
You know, I think for me, it's calling it out when you see it. I was like the example that I gave, it was a difficult situation because this was a customer. And so I needed to be careful about the words that I used. But at the same time, there was probably something I could have said, which was, I am in control of it. I have the accountability, and just driven that point home a little bit more. That's one thing. But then, I think there's a very simple step that we can take. I think a lot of us are probably in a lot of meetings all day, and making sure that everyone in that conversation has a chance to speak up and share their ideas. We've probably all experienced situations where there are certain people that, take control of a conversation and others can't really get a word in edgewise, or someone's always interrupting people. But taking control of it and making sure that you're asking across the board about people's input. I think all of that's helpful, starting with the little things.
Thank you for that, Shauna.
I guess just to add my own experience, and I'm the mother of 3 boys, for my sins. And I guess each time I had a child, and in Europe, you tend to take longer maternity leaves than you do in the US. But I guess each time I had a child and took my maternity leaves, every time I came back to work, I felt I had to start all over again. To build up the same levels of responsibility and scope and, just, I guess, status in the organization, if you will. And, it wasn't just something that happened to me once, it was something that happened to me kind of 3 times. And I know that I'm not on my own with regards to that being a scenario specific to me. I think it happens to many women. And, I took some, in that it happened, and, I kind of got myself back on track, and my career, kind of went off in the direction it had been in before. I took a lot of strength from that as an individual, but I guess the biggest thing that I learned from it is, a lot of women are kind of daunted from, the whole prospect of actually re-entering the workforce after having a child. And often feel kind of conflicted between motherhood and career, irrespective of which they choose. And I guess the message I would kind of give to anyone with that kind of sense of conflict between the two is that the world is evolving into a place where you can have both, and you can be very successful at both. And I guess the message I would give is be happy with the choice you make, whether you choose one or the other or both. And, I think that was kind of the big learning for me out of that whole experience.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Was there anything you wanted to add to that? We're good? Okay. So next question is, how should executives and senior leaders get involved in confronting bias, and how do they set an example? Beth, we'll start with you.
Yeah, thanks. So I think that it has to be a 0 tolerance policy. I think Shauna raised that as well, and it has to come from the top down. I think the other aspect that has to happen is that we aggressively address what we see in the workplace right away. Because what I found is that if we let these microaggressions or macroaggressions sit for too long, you lose that immediacy of the moment to go back in and coach that individual who's behaving in that way. So I think the idea here is that when we all experience these biases in the workplace, we have to call it out and escalate to our manager right away, so we get on the phone with that individual or in front of that individual quickly to help reset how we expect behavior to happen. And where I've seen it be less successful is when we wait too long and it's gone by and he said, she said. So we don't want to do that. We want to get on that quick. and elevate it really, really quickly and use our I messages, right? So not he did or they did, but your I messages, this is how it makes me feel. This is how I felt like I was, addressed and it was comfortable. So we have to do that quickly. I think institutionally, there's that bigger picture where, again, we need to invest in, Shauna said, training, and testing, right? So not just training, but actually do some testing afterwards to make sure that the content has been absorbed, especially when you look at unconscious bias. It's so hard to get your head around that. So I do think that top-down training is critical. I don't know what my peers think as well.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you said there, Beth. I mean, look, we have to lead by example. So we have to call it out when we see it. If we expect our teams to behave a certain way, we obviously have to do the same. But I also think, making sure that everyone understands, say, our hiring practices. If I pick on my own organization, it's obviously very male dominated. This is an architecture and engineering team. You can imagine that the ratios are a little bit slanted one way. So, making sure that, again, people understand what it takes to be successful, that we're measuring everyone similarly, that we are investing in bringing in diverse talent and women in particular into the organization. And then looking at, mentorship opportunities and leadership programs to really help prepare women for those next steps. I think that's really important because, we're in the conversation, but we're not there yet. As Beth said earlier, we're not celebrating the successes. We're just still kind of working our way through the conversations. And so we have to be very deliberate about raising women up and making sure that people understand that the reason why is because diverse thought leadership is so important. We accomplish so much more when, there's diversity in thought. And so, we need to be represented at all layers of an organization. So I think being very, very specific and intentional about the programs we create to raise women up is extremely important.
And I guess just to add to that and maybe provide a bit of a different slant as well on it, I think, from my perspective, I talked about accountability earlier and, increasing personal accountability towards ensuring that, in particular, we get rid of unconscious bias, which is, I guess, there's a lot of things, social norms, ways of, behaving, language that's used that has, kind of found its way into how people generally behave day to day. And perhaps it's a bit harder for individuals to kind of call that sort of stuff out. But where there's accountability, you need kind of checks and balances to ensure that, it's present in an organization. And, as a leader, I feel that, I have a duty to create an environment where people feel they can call it out on a very kind of, in a very casual way as well, if you will, so that it becomes normal to point out that actually, you've used this word here, maybe you should think about a different word, or, and that becomes, the culture of the business. And to get to that, you need an environment that actually is kind of, that has very high levels of trust. And I'm a firm believer that things take off when you have very high levels of trust within an organization, and it permeates throughout the culture. So I guess, to the question as to what I feel, I need to do as a leader, it's very much about creating that foundation of trust and then leading by example and making it acceptable for people to actually just point out perhaps, different ways of doing things and, things that maybe were not quite handled in the right way.
So powerful, just in that your leadership creates the culture. And this question sort of ties in with everything you're saying. So I'm going to direct it right back to Annette first. How do you think companies can best prevent implicit and unconscious bias in the workplace?
I think that the approach needs to be a multifaceted approach. I talked about setting up the foundations of the cultures such that people are not afraid to confront others and fear repercussion for doing so. But I guess there also needs to be more formal and explicit action in relation to bringing the whole organization along together with regards to education of and awareness of issues. I think it may have been mentioned earlier, but we've done a lot of unconscious bias training at Lumen for our global workforce, and also to support the development of our leaders, such that we all quite uniformly recognize scenarios when they arise. And we also maintain a very dedicated channel of learning tools and platforms that make information available and ready. I mean, I guess I'm those are kind of two examples there, and I'm sure there are many more that Beth and Shauna can come up with also.
One of the things I think about too is we have established a leader at the senior level that is focused 100% on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And I'm very proud that we have invested in that resource and continue to drive a conversation rather than point in time. Because I think my concern is that we have functions like that now that are showing up in institutions, and I don't want it to be a fad. I don't want it to be something that we've just, it's the new thing it's a new HR thing of the moment, and then we'll move on to something else. So I do think there's a level of accountability that as leaders, we have to keep pushing to make sure that this stays a part of corporate culture moving forward, because I do think that having safe spaces allows for that diversity in thought that we so desperately need in corporate America today. The other thing I think we're doing on the equity side that I hope more organizations are doing this too, is looking at transparency on how we're getting paid and how that relates to others within the organization. And so we can be very specific on what we think we deserve in the workplace. So there's a huge motion underway that is after that transparency, and I think over time that helps remove biases, because we can all see where those are happening from a quantitative perspective, because we can look at our teams as leaders, see how people are getting paid, and as individuals we can also see that. So that's really, I think, critical, and I hope that continues as well, that idea of more transparency, in the numbers of people that we have and how they're getting paid.
Yeah, and I would just reinforce some of the stuff that Beth was saying about the momentum. It's so important. We need to continue to make sure that we're driving for the diversity in our workforce. The transparency part is so important, but the momentum has to continue. This is definitely not a sprint. This is absolutely a marathon, and we're going to go through phases of success and struggle, but we've got to keep going. It's too important.
Are too important. Can you tell me a little bit about what Lumen is doing actively to advance gender equality and empower women, to empower all women every day?
Yeah, I'll touch on a couple of things. We touched on our leader that's focused on diversity, inclusion, and belonging. So that's an investment that we made over the last couple of years. And she's doing an outstanding job to help raise awareness with our senior leaders and driving programs within the organization to help address, all equality, but gender as well, which I think is important. We actually did a pay equity assessment and took action against that where we saw disparity in pay. And that's not a one and done. You know, we're going to continue to assess that over time to see, to make sure everyone's staying level, and the different groups are keeping up with the other groups, because that's so important. And then we have employee resource groups that are out there. And one of the big ones we have is called Women Empowered. So, you know, the great thing about our employee resource groups, it's not just a bunch of women, it's people that are allies of what women bring to the table. So I have a bunch of my peers who are part of the Women Empowered group, because these are everyone within that organization sees the benefit of raising the visibility and the contribution of women in the workforce. So I think, you know, those few things in particular stand out as being very specific things that we're driving every single day at Lumen.
And I've got some examples actually, which kind of layer in very nicely, Shauna, to what you've just been going through on the ERGs, the Employee Resource Groups, and our Women Empowered program, ERG. I'm the regional sponsor for the Women Empowered ERG in EMEA, and one of the things that we realized last year is that we've got a very high proportion of our female workforce in EMEA who are kind of in and around that menopause age. And there's a very scary statistic out there that 1 in 4 women actually drop out of the workforce because of the impact of the menopause. And we ran a series of kind of education sessions for our women in the region. The first 2 were specific to women and women only, and the third then was, you know, open to managers and to anyone really who wanted to join. And because our ERGs are all encompassing and involve not just women but allies, and you know, we have a huge population. We had a huge number of men that actually turned up to the third session to learn about it, to understand how they embrace, you know, some of their staff that are perhaps going through it and support them and so on and so forth. And it was such a powerful, example. For me, it's such a powerful example of why the employee resource groups and the movements that have been set up as a result of them kind of further advance, where we are as an organization as far as gender equality is concerned.
Absolutely. Elizabeth, did you want to expand on that one, or we can move to the next?
Move to the next. Yeah, I think those are the great examples.
They were amazing. And this is a little off topic, but I want to go back to Shauna. Can you share any insight as far as, I'm just so curious about when Lumen started diving into the disparity of pay? Can you give us any insight on the timeline between digging into those numbers and actually executing a change? Can you share that with Fairygodboss today?
That's a great question. I saw Beth come off mute, and I wonder if you know better than I do. It was months. It wasn't like years and years. So basically, we had the data. So it was an assessment and then a rollout. So I would say it was months, not years. And then this will be something that we continue. And Beth, you might have more information.
No, I agree. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yep. We acted quickly, which is something that was exciting to see, because I do know that a lot of times organizations or companies will just examine it and then kind of sit on it and try to decide what to do. But there's an active effort that's still going on, actually, to look at our female population and make sure that we have promotional opportunities available for them, and whether that be in place or across the board.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And honestly, it just kind of lines up, Elizabeth, with your aggressive path to taking care of business. That's impressive. So there's been a lot of regression for women in the workplace in the past 2 years. but what is one change that you celebrate and view as progress?
I can kick that one off. I think COVID was a double-edged sword because I do think that COVID in many ways was a factor for taking women out of the workplace. The numbers show that. But there is a positive outcome from COVID that I see for women. One of them is that corporations globally are much more interested in embracing a hybrid workforce and a remote workforce. And I think that allows for women to get a little bit more flexibility and hopefully a lot more balance between work and life if you're not in, pushing to get into the office every day. And so I think that movement does introduce flexibility for women who have families or parents or kids or dogs that need support, right? Pets that need support. So gives us a little bit more work-life balance, which I really think is fantastic. The other thing it does is it opens up the job market for us, right? So to the extent that you're in a market where there's not a lot of opportunity, it allows you to compete, nationally and even globally for opportunities because we are allowing everyone to work remotely. And so if it definitely allows us to be, I think, a little bit more competitive because we can't always move for a job. It might be family, it might be economics, it could be a lot of reasons. We don't always get to move for a big job. So this allows us to compete, I think, globally for roles, and that will help us get further up the pay equity scale as well. So I think I'm a half full person. I'm very optimistic. But that's what I see as sort of the silver lining that's come out of this the past couple of years.
And I guess just a nuance on Beth's first point there around hybrid working, I guess in addition to more flexible working arrangements, I think there's also, the lines between work and life have become an awful lot more blurred because of COVID. You've been allowed into everyone's living room. In Europe, it tends to be bedroom because, we live in much smaller properties in Europe than perhaps people do elsewhere in the US in particular. But you see an awful lot of people's personal situations, and we have done over the last couple of years. And I think as a result, there's an awful lot more acceptance that actually, when you finish your call, you are going to go and have to go and pick up a child, or and I think even with hybrid working, the fact that actually you can kind of flex in and out through that day, and just do something for a child. Or indeed, a day where you might not be working or whatever, you might have to do something because you flexed in a different way. I think that in itself is also quite positive with regards to, enabling more women to stay in the workforce and, to continue and advance their careers.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Beth and Annette have said. And I just appreciate the fact that we're in people's living rooms now over the last couple of years. I mean, we relate to each other as people and not just colleagues, and the empathy that we can have for each other, because all of a sudden you kind of see a little bit of what they're dealing with day in and day out and how they're pulled in, we're all pulled in so many different directions. I think it's okay that we know that about each other now, because it allows us to say, wow, that they have all this and they're still getting it done. Of course, I'm going to allow for flexibility. Of course, we can kind of tweak their working hours or where they work from, all of those things. So I think it's exciting. And really, that's not just for women. I mean, I think it's good across the board, where, people have challenging situations outside of work.
Absolutely. I love that. Can you talk to us about your interactions with other women in your career? Who has had the greatest influence on you? And then also, do you have a woman in your life that you wanted to celebrate today?
Sure, I'll kick it off. I've absolutely had a chance to work with some amazing women, and I think I've really relied on those interactions just to kind of watch at how they've navigated, whether it's just me from the sideline or directly reaching out and asking them questions about a situation that I'm trying to work through. And I got to tell you, I think one of the things that I get a lot out of is being a mentor in these mentor groups. The women that come to the table to have these conversations, I get so much out of it. Even though I'm supposed to be the mentor and leading the conversation, it's amazing the insight that I get out of that, because we're all at different stages of our lives. Some are older, some are younger, some are in leadership roles, some are still individual contributors. And I really value that. And I try to make time to do it here at Lumen in particular, because I do get so much out of understanding other women's personal experiences. And if I had to pick a woman to celebrate today, I'm going to say it's Sonia Ramsey. She's a woman that works here at Lumen. And when I first started the company a bunch of years ago, there was a women's network. And I got paired up with Sonia. She was my mentor at the time. And I relied on her to have some of those conversations to figure out how to navigate a challenging situation. I was pretty early in my career, so things were pretty new, and I was probably intimidated to raise certain things as concerns. And then our paths had diverged a bit over the years, but we got a chance to work together as peers over the last few. And I just really appreciate her positive attitude, the energy she brings every single day. She's an amazing leader and builds successful teams here. So I'll give Sonia a shout out today.
Cheers, Sonia.
I guess just to maybe add to that, and I feel like the answer I'm going to give, it's like talking about your child like they're the best child in the world, my answer now. But I guess through my career, I've actually spent an awful lot more time, vast majority of my career, working for men, over women. And so I guess my experience working directly for women is kind of, relatively limited. But I guess the example I'm going to give, I've stumbled upon, not quite stumbled upon, but I think I'm now working for the best person I've ever worked for in my life, in Lorinda Pang, who, obviously she's on the senior leadership team at Lumen, and she runs customer success. And what I love about her is she's her personality shines through in absolutely everything she does, and she's such a warm, compassionate, and lovely human being, and she takes it into every engagement she has. And I think one of the things that I've seen historically, which is something I think is disappearing, but you see women who get to a very senior level and they kind of lose their personalities, if you will, to an extent, trying to operate in a male-dominated world. And Lorinda is someone who just exudes herself, and has managed to be as successful as she is and retain that who she is as she's done so anyway.
And then I think you stole my thunder with.
Oh, did I?
You probably should have planned that. And I agree with you, and I love how you talked about her ability to sort of to be herself in a leadership position, for not compromising, the way she speaks, or the way she approaches things, and bring in that human side. Another woman that I also sort of was very instrumental, sort of mid-career for me, was Lisa Miller. And what Lisa Miller brought was, again, her own personality to the table, and she was unrelenting in doing that. And I think that made me feel bolder about not just being an automaton and very data driven, but bring my personality to the table and feel confident that, that I can be, who I am in whatever conversations that I'm in. So I think the two of them both bring that special balance between maybe, corporate speak and individuality, which I really appreciate, because I think that's what drives, when we talk about gender diversity in the workplace, if we don't bring our personalities to bear, then we aren't actually creating that diverse workplace that we talked about. So it feels very good to see leaders who kind of pave the way for us to feel comfortable. And so I agree with you.
So powerful and so interesting, because I think a lot of our stories are just like yours, Annette, where we haven't had much experience working for women. And, I watched this, and this is off topic, but I watched the confirmation of Judge K. Brown. And watching that, I cried, I laughed, I was angry, I was fired up. And at the end of it, it reminded me that, and I've never watched a confirmation with those emotions, but it reminded me that what she was doing as a diverse woman is she's bringing humanity back where it belongs. And I think, I'm not saying men don't have the ability to, I'm saying I believe that women just naturally, that's what we bring to the table. And I love having these conversations. And I really believe that people like me, people like you will change the world, so that in 10 years, there's a panel of women and they've only worked for women leaders. And so thank you so much for sharing that. We typically take 3 to 5 questions, and there were some questions that were popping up in the chat box. I will ask, if you put a question in the chat box, I'll try to pull them out, but if you can shift that over to the Q&A. And while people are doing that, I wanted to do this first. So we call this a lightning round. And at Fairygodboss, we have this tradition where we've observed that women don't feel comfortable enough bragging or taking ownership of all the amazing things that they achieve. So would you be willing to role model for us and share an accomplishment, personal or professional, that you're most proud of? And Shauna, I'm going to start with you.
All right. Yes, I will share one, and it's recent in nature. So in my role here at Lumen, it's a recent phenomenon. I was promoted back in January, and I've been absolutely overwhelmed by the positive response that I've gotten. People have told me, either directly or even to my boss, what a fantastic, unexpected choice that it was. And so I'm just incredibly proud of the fact that people recognize, the work that I do, but also how I do it. And people see me in this role and saying, you're such a good collaborator. We're super excited you're in that role. That makes me happy. And I'm just really proud of the fact that people recognize it. And I'm happy that they told me. That makes me feel good, kind of keep on doing what you're doing. So that's my example.
Love it. And congrats on your promotion, Shauna.
Thanks.
This is so hard. I love that you make us do this. So I'm terrible at it. And those people, hopefully some of my team are on the call and they see me do this because they'll be proud of me. It's still, we all are evolving, but we still have places to grow, and this is a place I have to grow. So I was nominated to be the leader of the year for the customer experience practice in the international customer experience professional conference. And so I'm very proud of being a silver winner. I wasn't quite gold, but I still think I need to promote that, because we beat out a number of really big brands, and we were only second to Lego, which is hard to compete with the customer experience that Lego brings. But I am very super excited about winning that, and I don't share it enough according to my team. So there you go.
Love it. That was perfect.
Do I have to?
Well, absolutely. You can do hard things, Annette.
Yeah, this is the development area for me as well. I very recently was nominated as Capacities 2022, one of 2022's Women to Watch in EMEA. So that's kind of, it's an industry thing. So that is my one. And yeah, I found that hard.
And you know what? I think it's going to be hard until you do it over and over again. And so I just want to urge each of you to do a little humble brag every once in a while so that this is natural. You deserve it. So I am going to skip over to the questions now. So I have someone that says, hello. I have a VP currently managing me, and I have brought up an issue where none of the two women on the team are part of the interview process for our new director. The director will be our manager working under this VSP. My question is that when I bring things up, when I hear from him is, I hear what you're saying, and I'm not the kind of person that X, then proceeds to take my issue in a different direction. Does anyone have any tips for what I can do in this situation?
I guess often it's kind of scenario specific, and at risk of just maybe interpreting what's going on there. I guess if explaining why having a diverse interview panel is important, isn't working, then the human resource equivalent in your organization should respect that, understand it, and perhaps there's another angle you can go down to maybe get yourself into the position where you are interviewing the person, or at least meeting them. So I would probably, if the direct approach doesn't work, just find another way of getting getting the conversation kind of going in your favor. That's probably what I would suggest. It's a tough one.
Yeah, I would also say that sometimes, definitely HR, the recruiting process, the recruiter, but I would also say that maybe some of your VP's peers, maybe someone that you also speak to in a very sort of polite way to say, we're interviewing women for these roles, or we're interviewing people for these roles. I'd love to be a participant in this roles. What is your counsel to me? Something that you can trust that can help you coach with that individual, because we don't know that individual. Maybe there are ways in which you can get some counsel from other leaders within the organization and how to address this with your male VP.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Next question is, how has Lumen determined that there is an ROI for bias education?
I don't know that I don't know that it's specific to bias education. I think what we know as an industry and we know as a workforce is that there is an ROI on diversity. There is an ROI on having women in leadership. That's absolutely proven and out there. So bias education is simply what, kind of the baseline, the platform for ensuring that we continue to drive that diversity within our workforce. And that to me is where you start to see the ROI. So the training part is absolutely foundational. And I think what you look to then is the, kind of the industry understanding about diverse thought.
Thank you for that. And then our next question is, any advice for a mid-level female who needs to address bias coming from a direct manager?
Well, I mean, I think coming at it very, very specifically to say, this is what you're saying, this is what I hear. I think that's one way to do it. I think if, it kind of goes back to that first question that we have, if you don't feel like you are being heard, then there may be an opportunity to have someone from human resources help to moderate the conversation. I'd like to assume that the person just, they're not realizing it. And if you shine the light on it, then I'd like to think they're going to make the appropriate changes. So, I think, again, being very direct and saying, this is causing me, this is how I feel when you say these things. I think I'd start there, but there's always other resources, to help mediate the conversation if you don't feel like you're getting through or being heard.
And I think the approach as well, is different depending on whether it's conscious or unconscious. I think Shauna's, suggestion is absolutely the right thing to do if it's unconscious, but if it's a conscious effort, then I guess there's probably other mechanisms, more formal mechanisms that are needed to be pursued, perhaps in addition. Maybe human resources again may help in that scenario.
That's good. Okay. Next question. Intersectionality is important and often overlooked. What are you as Lumen leaders doing to uplift women of color and trans women?
I think this is actually where the structures that we put in place around our employee resource groups are, in fact, most powerful. Because these aren't just isolated groups that operate without kind of any reference point to the other groups. They very much interplay with one another, and issues that kind of cross multiple groups do get dealt with in collaboration. We recently had a speaker come in to talk to staff in Europe. We had a trans woman who was also she was an engineer and also a person of color. So we had multiple ERGs that kind of got together to promote that, and it was such a resounding success, and it was very thought provocative in terms of the dialogue and the discourse that we were able to have because of the intersection of multiple things going on there that were relevant to multiple kind of cross sections of our staff. So that's just an example of some of the things that we're able to foster as a result of the employee resource group structure that has been built up and is evolving within Lumen.
I would also add that we have what we call mentor rings, which is again a formalized mentor program that this year was very targeted on people of color. We have a shockingly low amount of people of color globally that work for Lumen, and particularly in certain areas of the country or the globe. And so I think that there is less mobility in that population. There's, seems to be less opportunity there. So there are some intentional places where we're trying to drive inclusion across those intersected populations, because in that group there is always a significant amount of women who are joining those and taking control of their career and really trying to be part of those opportunities. So I think that's a little bit of a microcosm, I think, of what Annette's talking about from a global perspective. We also and we have I would say resource groups for every different diverse population, however you slice it, which is really, really good. And that is attended by those that aren't necessarily part of that population, which is really exciting to see.
Okay, thank you for that. And then I know we are running short on time, but I've got a couple of more questions. This one is, I run a team of project managers, and I often feel the women on the team get dragged into more admin heavy items, and the men on my team, than the men on my team do. Any advice on how to change the culture around that stigma?
Well, I mean, the first thing, as I read the question, the person saying that they actually run the team. And so I think that person absolutely has the opportunity to call out the behavior, maybe even divvy up the workload, being the one to say, these are the types of projects that people are going to work on. And so maybe it's a matter of, this person this month gets the latest admin heavy project, and the next month it's someone else, the next month it's someone else, however those flow into the system. But if I'm reading it correctly, and this person's the one in charge of those project managers, then I'd like to think that they're also in charge of how the work gets divvied up. And why not call it out? Why not say, guys, I want to make sure that everyone's getting an opportunity to work on the most interesting projects, because I want to raise the bar across the board for all of the project managers. And so I'm going to make sure that each one of you has a complicated project, but then I'm going to give your brain a break and you've got an admin heavy project on the side, something like that. And make sure that everyone understands it's a way to build up the overall skill set and performance of the team.
That's really good. And anonymous attendee, I hope that Shauna has given you the courage to begin to shift the culture on your team. Thank you so much for that. And then I'm going to wrap things up with this one last question. Could you share your own professional mantras that you repeat to yourselves daily in moments of doubt?
I won't say it's a mantra, but I heard this from someone else at one point, and I think it's really good advice, which is if I'm struggling with something, or I'm afraid of failing at something, I just need to look back on all the times I've actually been successful. And I got to tell you, it's a whole lot more than I've had any kind of epic failure. So, why not just remind ourselves of all the amazing things that we've done to get to these points in our careers, to raise a family, to get a degree, like pick your thing that you've done successfully, run a marathon. It doesn't matter, but look at what you've been able to overcome and lean on that. I think that's really important. I could probably stand to do that daily, but I tend to do it just in moments of doubt.
Mine is, if I'm faced with a dilemma, which I am, on a daily basis, pretty much on something or other, the question I always ask myself is, what's the brave thing I need to do here? And that tends, if I can answer that question, it tends to be more often than not the right answer.
Mine was really similar. Be bold. I think that, sometimes I feel like I need to remind myself that the reason I'm excited about the work that I do is because we're able to make change. And so because I get so much personal satisfaction out of seeing those successes, I want to keep reminding myself, like, this is your moment to be bold. This is not easy. Trust yourself, because you have the right answer. You have the right answer.
So good. So good. Annette, Beth, Shauna, this has been really sweet for me. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your insights and your experiences. We really appreciate all the advice that you've shared. And for everyone still out there, you can learn more about Lumen's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and why women love working at the company. You can check them out on fairygodboss.com, as well as all of their open roles. Ladies, this has been lovely. I'll see you soon. And bye, everyone.
Thank you.